Well, let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Fowler, and I'm the Director of Development for AutoDayTrade.com. In case you don't know what we do, AutoDayTrade.com creates trading robots. And trading robots we sell to the public, we sell to institutions, and we use for our own selves. We're a research and development company, and we're good at making robots. However, we do have to do our own software development in the background, and that's what this webinar is all about. It's about the developers version, which is only available as part of our Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign. You may only acquire the developers version through that campaign. I cannot stress enough that we have no plans to offer this software following the campaign. So if you find it as intriguing as I do, please acquire it before the time is up. We're down to about 1 day left in our campaign, so please go there to Indiegogo.com and make a contribution to acquire the developers version. Go directly to the campaign at the web address listed here, or go to Indiegogo.com and search robotic trading. You'll find us right away. Okay. Hope you've had a chance to attend or at least watch the webinar from June 24th, 2013, the AutoDayTrade.com Developers Version Technical Presentation. It's available through the link about the developers version on the main page of our Indiegogo campaign. You may be here just to have a look at what happens under the hood of a robot, or you may actually want to build your own robot. In either case, I don't think you'll be disappointed. As in other webinars on this topic, we're going to get pretty technical at times, but that's why you're here, right? Okay, let's get started. The developers version is used internally at AutoDayTrade.com for all of our robots. It has the most sophisticated money management of any trading platform. This we went into in that first webinar on June 24th. So if you want to learn more about money management, please go back there and read up about it there. There are 50 plus parameters, plus trails and stops, depending on how you configure your robot. If you're a trader, you already know most of the parameters that work for you, so it's not that daunting a task. We do not release the settings for our own robots, but each parameter has a usable default value, so you can start to work on your robot with something. It was developed in C# and has an open indicator architecture. This means you can add your own indicators to the package. We'll go into this a little bit. The developers version represents 500,000 lines of code, a $400,000 investment, and 3 years of work. I hope you will take advantage of our efforts and acquire the developers version through our Indiegogo campaign today. Here's what I hope to cover today. We're going to do a quick overview of the robot architecture, discuss more in depth AutoDayTrade.com's indicator architecture, which is substantially different than other trading platform providers' indicators. Then I'm going to introduce another of AutoDayTrade.com's indicators, the MultiMACD Indicator, and go over the functionality of our FibPro Indicators. Finally, we're going to create and refine a robot from scratch. This is so much fun, I really think you'll love it. Ready? Okay, here we go. First, a discussion of AutoDayTrade.com's robot architecture and how it fits into the NinjaTrader implementation. We use NinjaTrader 7 and follow the general guidelines set forth by NinjaTrader. We extend the idea of an indicator as well as a strategy, using features of C# and .NET 4.0 to add security, inter-process communication, web service access, and so forth. Our ADT engine loads into NinjaTrader as a strategy. Then you load the strategy settings that define the robot you're currently working on. So ADT engine executes the strategy. It triggers trades, manages open trades, trails, and stops, and handles money management. Indicators in our model provide trade commands. They collaborate in communicating trade triggers back to the strategy. Our open architecture allows you to write your own indicators. Still with me? I'm now going to discuss indicators a little bit more in depth. We implemented indicators differently than any other trading platform. I'm going to show you how indicators in our platform drive the trade trigger decision. Although this is covered in other presentations, it's so important, I'm going to give it a quick review here. It is necessary to really understand these topics. Indicators drive the trade trigger decision in the robot. Each indicator is programmed to reach a decision on trading independent of all the other indicators. What's shown here are the critical decision parameters for one of our FibPro indicators that we'll be using today. Stick with me here though. Since you may use a variety of indicators, and each indicator provides its own trade decision, the robot uses a trigger definition to decide when to enter long or short. A trade is triggered based on a collaboration of indicator decisions as shown in the picture. Indicators may be included, excluded, or forced to participate. This all was covered in the technical presentation on June 24th, so we won't go any more in depth into it now. Okay, time to introduce our MultiMACD indicator. You're going to love this, especially if you're familiar with the MACD. As most of you already know, MACD, or MACD, stands for Moving Average Convergence Divergence, and is a combined trend following and momentum indicator. AutoDayTrade.com's MultiMACD indicator lets you create from 1 to 10 MACD indicator lines by defining one MACD and then the difference that should be applied to creating the others. You end up with a series of indicator lines with ever-increasing look-back periods that expand the meaning of convergence divergence to include feedback from a bunch of different periods simultaneously. The MultiMACD is easy to create, but hides a great deal of complexity. Today we're going to create a MultiMACD indicator using 5 MACD lines. As always in the developer's version, you start by defining the indicator over in the Strategy Management console. The definition of the MACD is divided into 4 sections. The placement section indicates whether to show the indicator at all, or which of the NinjaTrader panels to place it in, and which scale to use. We'll set this on our own robot later. The lines and color sections let you define the visual interface while the indicator is being drawn on the NinjaTrader chart. Again, we'll set this up on our own robot later. The triggers section let you define the visual and audio interface for when the trigger indicates a trade. We'll set this up in our own robot later. Now we're going to set up the parameters that make AutoDayTrade.com's MACD unique. Okay, so here are the main types of parameters for AutoDayTrade.com's MultiMACD indicator. The indicator source lets you choose which chart value to track and from which to create the plot lines. Open, close, high, and low refer to the price values in a bar. The last provides the intriguing option of using MACDs on the volume values. Today we're going to use the close option. The number of MACDs and the primary plot line tell the MACD how many plot lines to create and which one is, visually anyway, the primary line. We'll get to just how they're created in a minute here. Today we're going to create a robot with 5 lines. I generally use the typical 12, 26, 9 settings for MACD values. However, other values may be substituted depending on your trading style and goals. These are used and applied to bars. All else being equal, they would indicate a fast EMA period of 12 bars, a slow EMA period of 26 bars, and so forth. As you'll see, however, they are only a starting point because the plot multiplier parameters we will discuss in a minute modify them for each of the MACD lines drawn. The lag bars setting is sort of odd in my opinion, but one of our traders uses it to good effect. It forces the calculation of the current bar's MACD plot lines to be based on some amount of bars earlier. In other words, with the setting of 1 shown, all the MACD's lines are actually lagging 1 bar behind what they ought to be. This lets the current bar, or however many bars you specify there, to not contribute to the MACD triggering decision. It lets the price action in the current bar happen independently of the MACD plot lines that are contributing to the trade trigger decision. Here you specify how many of the MACD plot lines must agree to trigger a trade, and for how many bars back they must agree. We'll cover this in detail while building the robot later in this webinar. This is the heart of AutoDayTrade.com's MultiMACD Indicator. Here's where you define the MACD plot lines that eventually work together to form a trade trigger decision. The plot 1 MACD multiplier is used in creating the first plot line. The multiplier is applied to the fast, slow, and smooth MACD parameters. Remember that those parameters are specified in bars. So if, for example, you're using the default MACD 12, 26, 9 parameters, the first plot line results in a MACD using 4, 7, and 2 as the fast, slow, and smooth MACD settings. That is the original values multiplied by 0.25. If you're a little lost, don't worry yet. I'll show you an example and give you a spreadsheet I used to guide these settings. All other plots, numbers 2 through however many you specified in the number of MACDs parameter, simply multiply the previous plot line's fast, slow, and smooth parameters by the plot 2 to n multiplier to get their values. Let's look at a spreadsheet I use for this purpose. We'll use this spreadsheet live when we create our own robot in a little while. But see how the settings of the chart size and MACD periods are modified by the plot multipliers, resulting in 5 different plot lines? Plot 1 is very short and reactive, looking back only 6 bars and 3 minutes for its slow MACD parameter, while plot 5 has MACD fast, slow, and smooth parameters of 31, 68, 23, looking back a maximum of 34 minutes. Okay, that's enough on the MultiMACD. Let's quickly discuss the FibPro indicator and then get on to building our robot. Our FibPro indicators create a moving Fibonacci retracement that reflects the standard ratios but lets you customize the extent to which they are calculated and applied. Again, you start by defining the indicator over in the Strategy Management console. The FibPro definition, like most of our robots, is divided into 4 sections. We're going to ignore the other sections since they are similar to the settings in the MultiMACD to concentrate on the parameters section. This is a fairly easy indicator to set up. You tell it how far to look back, how far off the price to trigger trades, and what price to render up to the robot. The start seconds back and end seconds back parameters identify the area on the chart in which the Fibonacci retracements are to be calculated. The result is a dynamic area of the chart that tracks forward in time as the chart is drawn, and from the middle of which trade decisions are based. You will see this when we create a robot from scratch in a few minutes here. The long and short ticks parameter defines how far off the middle of the dynamic area of the chart the price has to be for trades to trigger. Again, be patient while I show you a specific example in a minute. This parameter helps the indicator render up a price to the robot. This is only used if the trigger is set to use this one as the entry price from indicator. In other words, the robot is asking this indicator for a price as set over in the triggers. You'll see that later. Checking this box causes the FibPro to give the price at the long or short line, as defined by the long and short ticks, the parameter that you saw a minute ago. If you clear the checkbox, the FibPro gives the last seen price instead, which may be quite different than the price at the line. With all that said, let's create our robot. There are a few things you must do, and the first is to decide on a general theme and timescale. All of you who use NinjaTrader and various trading platforms already have an idea of what you want to see in a robot. You have indicators you like and an idea of how far back those indicators should be looking to give you good results. This is what we're going to do. For me, deciding on indicators and general time scale is pretty easy. I like very active charts that provide for many opportunities for trades. Looking back days, weeks, or months is just not for me. So I'm going to use indicators with look-back times ranging from just a few minutes to not more than an hour. Because of these general guidelines, I am choosing to use AutoDayTrade.com's FibPro and MultiMACD indicators, which provide triggers based on price action, convergence, divergence, and momentum. Just what I want to see. Okay, let's run the software and create a draft robot. Looking at my strategy organizer, you can see that I've created a strategy called New Empty Robot, right here. It already has my preferred stops and trails defined for gold, which is what I'm going to use today. And since we're not talking about stops and trails today, we'll just make a copy of that to get started. So I click on the copy button. I'm going to rename it to my new robot. And I'm going to tell it that we're using gold. And then we're on the screen on the form here where it's time to set up indicators. I'm just going to add the indicators and make sure they're right on the correct panel of the NinjaTrader chart to get started. So we'll start with our MultiMACD indicator. And I click on it. I'm just going to tell the software that I do indeed want to plot it on the chart. And I want it in panel number 1 using the left side scale. Now I'm going to add a FibPro macro. Again, I want to plot the indicator. Told I want it to also be in chart panel 1, but I want its scale to be on the right side. And I'm going to add a FibPro micro. Plot the indicator also in chart panel 1 and on the right side scale. Okay, we're not going to worry too much about the details of the settings yet. We'll go on though and create trigger alerts. Remember when we discussed indicators, the indicators work together to trigger a trade. And this is basically how it works. I'm going to call this my long trigger. And I'm going to tell it that I want to use all 3 of my indicators and that all 3 are required. And further, that I want to get my price, not from the micro, but from the macro, and reset on the macro, mid-line. And I'll leave everything else alone there. We'll add the short trigger real fast. Change this to a short. Call it short trigger. Indicate that I want all 3 of my indicators to participate. Entry price from FibPro macro. Crossover line on macro. Midline. We'll talk about that crossover line as we're running the robot that we create later. So you can see here's my long trigger. Here's my short trigger. It changes the color when it knows what type of trigger it is. Okay, limit order ticks 3. I almost always use 3. And limit order time of 30 seconds. And trade on bar 2, which we will discuss later. Contract management, as I said, my positions are all set up already for my gold trading to the way I like, so I'm going to leave them alone. Profit and loss, I turn off my preserve profit and Excel loss limit checkboxes for initial setting of the parameters of the robot because I want to know what happens over a long period of time. I don't want to hit a profit target and then turn off. And one more thing, on the session screen, this checkbox at the top, I click trade all the time just for testing purposes. Later I would refine it with specific sessions. Okay, next thing to do is to decide on a replay period. I'm going to use a replay period and run it over and over with the various indicator and robot settings until I like it. I'm using June 22nd, 2013 from midnight to 4 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, which covers part of the London and New York days. So I have my NinjaTrader set up for replay. I'm going to set it to about midnight on 5/22, and then I'm going to open myself a gold chart. Now remember, back on 5/22, the gold being used was GC0613. So that's the chart I'm going to create here. So we went over this in the last webinar. It's pretty straightforward data strategy, so I'm not going to spend any time on that. I'm just going to add the strategy that I just created over in the Strategy Management Console. So I create my ADT engine, I enable it, I choose the strategy of my new robot, and I hit OK. I'm going to go over and tell the NinjaTrader control panel that I want to run my replay information, replay data, and here we go. Okay, well, what have we here? Let's sort of analyze what we've got. Looks a little bit like a mess. But over here on the right side, you can see that there are 5 lines, all in the same color, that are tracking and showing trends, and also momentum. You can see how steep they get when the price changes quickly. When the price is changing slowly, they don't have much steepness to them at all. Those are the MultiMACD indicator. The other lines here, the red and the blue dashed and the gray dashed lines, as well as the up and down arrows, are parts of the FibPro Micro and Macro. What we're going to do next is sort of refine all these settings. So I'm just going to leave this and go back to Strategy Management Console, edit my new robot, and let's start with giving the FibPro Macro and Micro some reasonable settings so that I can see useful data when that comes up. So I click on my FibPro Macro and see it's set to 5 seconds to 25 seconds of look back. Well, hey, I'm using 30-second bars. That doesn't do me any good. I want to go back some reasonable amount of time. For my macro, let's just do, say, 200 to 2,000 seconds. And for my micro, let's change it, say, it should be a little bit smaller. I want a little bit more reactive FibPro here. So I'm going to go 100 to 500 seconds. And again, after you experiment with and use the robots, you get used to what reasonable settings are for different bar types. One other thing I'm going to do is change the visual interface of these so that we can actually see a little better what's on the screen. I'm going to go back to my MultiMACD, and for my primary line, I'm going to change that to green. Let's use lime, and we'll make it a solid 3-pixel wide line. And then for my secondary lines, I use the same color, but I'm going to use a dash line only 1 pixel wide. And further, when it calls for a trade, I'm not going to use the up and down arrow markers. I don't like those. Instead, I'm going to use the vertical lines, and I'll make it a dashed line of width only 1. So it's very small and not intrusive. And I'm going to use a darker blue. So let's use midnight blue here. Where is that? There it is. And for the vertical line, for the short trade signal, I'm going to do the same thing, make it a dashed line of width 1, and make it a nice dark red like, oh, let's use maroon. That way it'll be unobtrusive, yet easy to see. Okay, let's just define the macro. Let's use gold for our macro. We often do that for our own robots. And so the mid-fib line, I'm going to make a gold dash line of 1 pixel wide. I'm going to hide these other 2 lines because I don't really want to see them in the middle of all the work that I do preliminary. I may decide later that it's more useful to have it, but I don't want it there now. And then my box I also want in gold. So I'm going to start that up like that. And it should be, I think, a solid line, and 3 pixels would be good for that. Okay, I already set my start and end seconds back. And my long and short ticks, let's make that a little bigger, which is more conservative. And I want to use the signal price. And then for the micro, instead of light gray, I'm going to use aqua, which is what we use for our own robots. I'm used to it, so I'll do it. I'm actually going to make the mid and long lines transparent, however. I'm only going to show the box. Clean up my display quite a bit by doing that. You can turn on and off whatever lines you want. Okay, and then for the box, I want a solid line, 3 pixels wide. And I already set my start and end seconds back. My long and short ticks, I'm going to leave it 2, which is pretty aggressive. That means the price doesn't have to be far off the midline for it to trigger a trade. And then I'm going to set my markers to be the color that I chose for the lines. And then go back to my macro and do the same thing for my trigger markers. Set this to gold. So it'll point up for long, down for low in gold. Okay, so that gives us a much better visual interface to kind of see what's going on. Let's go back to our chart. You see it's running along happily. I don't know if you know it, but in the replay control panel, if you right-click and choose Go To, it lets you choose a date and time. If you do that, I'm going to go back to 12:12 a.m. It reloads everything about the strategy. And we have it programmed so that if you do that, it goes back to the strategy organizer and reloads it from there. So all the changes we made to the strategy will be reflected when I change what the time and date are in the replay data. So here we go. Give it a second to reload. Okay. Now remember that we made the FibPro macro gold. That's this very large rectangle. That's showing the Fibonacci retracement area that the macro is using. And the FibPro micro is this aqua-colored rectangle. This gold dashed line is the midline of the FibPro macro. And the green lines represent our MultiMACD or MACD. Remember from the technical webinar that we did before that you can turn on tool strips that allow you to hit the parameters for each of these. So up here on the left you can see the micro parameters of 100 to 500 seconds, plus or minus 2 ticks, and use signal price. The FibPro macro is 200 to 2000 seconds, plus or minus 4 ticks, use signal price. And the MultiMACD, how many we're using, which one is the primary, the fast, slow, and smooth settings, how many bars to lag, plot 1's multiplier, the other plot's multipliers, consensus, and bars. Consensus says three of the plot lines have to agree to trigger a trade. And the bars back say how many bars back do they have to agree for to choose a trade. Now look at the chart and see how red and blue it is. There's a whole string of reds here, a whole string of blues, a whole string of reds, a whole string of blues. Remember that the red and blue lines are the trigger indicators for the MultiMACD. What this tells me looking at the chart is, wow, the MultiMACD is trying to trigger trades all the time. It is clearly not conservative enough. So without going back into the strategy organizer, let's increase the consensus. Let's tell it that it needs all 5 lines to agree, and then accelerate the replay and kind of see if that cleans up the issue of there being way too many triggers for the MACD. I'm going to accelerate it to 50 times and just let it charge forward a little bit here. A little bit different. Not that much though. Maybe enough. I definitely don't want triggers all the time. I want there to be some differentiation from one time slot to the next. So okay, that's not too bad. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go back into my strategy management console and make sure that that setting gets saved. Go to my MultiMACD. Tell it that 5 of them, all 5 have to agree for it to trigger a trade. And 3 bars back is not a bad look back period. Okay, let's take a minute right here and talk about what the settings mean in the context of the 5 different lines and their multipliers. I'm going to bring my little spreadsheet that I use over here. And on the right you see the settings, and on the left you see my spreadsheet. Let's make sure they're the same. I've got 5 MACDs, 12, 26, and 9 are my fast, slow, and smooth MACD settings. The MACD plot 1 multiplier is 0.25, and the plots 2 through n are set to 2, so I'm going to change this to 2. Okay, now look down here, row number 1. It shows that the fast, slow, and smooth settings for line number 1 are 3, 6.5, and 2.3. Now obviously it truncates those numbers because you don't actually get partial bars in a MACD in NinjaTrader. So it's 3, 6, and 2. For my line number 5, it's 48, 104, and 36. Now convert bars to seconds and minutes, and like you can see right here that it's almost an hour of look back for the longest line. Let's go back to the chart and use this little tool that shows primary plot. This doesn't affect the calculation of the line, but what it does do is it changes which one takes on the characteristics that you said the primary plot would have visually. So if we go back, it'll show here's number 1. See the line highlighted? Click up. There's number 2. Click up. There's number 3. Click up. There's number 4. Click up. There's number 5. So number 5 has the longest look back period, and as you can imagine, it's the least reactive. If we go back to our spreadsheet and we say, you know, I want to look back a lot further. I want to go back to where my longest look back period is about 2 hours. Then I'm going to change my plots 2 through n multiplier. If I change it to 3, watch what happens. Wow, it's a huge difference. Now I'm looking back 4 hours, so that's obviously not what I want. Let's go 2.5, 2.6 is too big, although we're getting there. We're only at 2.5 hours. Let's go 2.4, an hour and 47 minutes. So that's what I want right there, hour and 47 minutes. So I'm going to change this from 2 to 2.4, and that's going to immediately change the character of my bars. See how they all took a big jump? What happened is they all got much more conservative. All the green lines, looking back a much longer period, all of a sudden got more conservative, except plot line number 1, which only is affected by this parameter, the 0.25 from plot 1. So it didn't change, but all the others, the period that they look back got changed significantly, and they're looking back much further. Now we have yet to apply this to trying to do some trades. I'm right now just looking at the robot, making sure that it fits the general time scale that I want to work within, and that the triggers that we're seeing kind of make sense. Let's take a second and evaluate the triggers that are being called for, the trades being called for by the FibPro Micro and the Macro. So this gold box represents the FibPro Macro, and the center line right here is the basis, the starting point for where it determines whether or not a trade should be called for. The line is roughly calculated based on the trade area in here and what's going on in here, but more specifically, the Fibonacci retracement patterns that are going on inside there. And this rectangle hits the high and the low lines based on the look-back period. So what we want to do is center this on the high and low lines and then let it shift up and down. Let me accelerate this so you can see it shifting a little bit. Shift up and down with the trade patterns so that the center line, that is the gold dotted line that's shown right here, moves with the pattern. Now, the price action is shifted way, 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 way down here. Well, we're way below the center line. And if you look back on the control panel up here, we only have to be 4 ticks off that middle line for the macro to be calling for a short trade. So it is calling for a short trade. And right here, it's indicated by these gold down arrows that you see all through here. Some cases, when you have the micro and the macro calling at the same time, the micro arrow overlays the macro arrow, so you can only see the micro. You can tell by where the price action is that it's calling. The same thing is happening with the FibPro Micro, this aqua box. The price action is well down below the midline of the FibPro Micro, and so it too is calling for a short trade. Now, interestingly enough, remember how we programmed the MACD? It's calling for a short trade too, as evidenced by this red dashed vertical line. So what we're going to do is go back into the console, finish setting up our triggers, finish setting up our MACD the way we like it, the way we decided to, with a 2.4 setting over here. And then we're going to restart our day. So let's do that. Go back over here. I've got the MACD selected. I'm going to change it to 2.4 for the multiplier so it has a much less aggressive variation momentum. I'm going to go to my trigger alerts, make sure they're set up using the macro for the price and the crossover line. And in a minute or two, you'll see that crossover line in action. And the short trigger also. Okay, so we're good. That was the only thing we had to change. Now we're going to go back to the start of our day, which is, again, 12:0 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, because that's the time zone I'm in. And our strategy management console we can set aside. Okay, now what we want to do is, let's start the robot. We review the settings in the Engine Trader toolbar here. Remember, we set the limit orders to 3 with 30 seconds. That means that the price has to be within 3 ticks of what we call for within 30 seconds, or it passes on that trade. We have exit trade on reversal check, which we'll get to here in a minute, and trade on bar 2, which we'll get to in a minute too. That's a very unique feature that we really love. You can set which bar of a series that it would call for a trade on, that it actually takes the trade. We found that trading on the first bar too often gets you into a reversal. So we prefer to make our robots wait, be a little bit more patient. Okay, I'm just going to crank this up and let it charge on to the first trade, wherever that happens. There, we're in a trade here, and it's a long trade. And I'm going to extend my scale a little bit there, and then accelerate through the trade, and let's see what we get here. So it liked that it was long, and it closed out the trade now. I'll slow things down here so I can explain. You can see that everybody was calling for a trade here with the vertical line here. So with the vertical blue line and the up arrow here, and we can see by the price action that we're above the midline by 2 ticks in the FibPro macro. And so it called for a long with a limit order of 30 seconds, and it did get back to the price that it called for and enter the trade. It entered 3 positions, which is what I have defined for it over in the Strategy Manager console, and the 3 trades exited with a small positive. It's a $130 trade. You can see down here in the corner, it's $130. If I zoom in on it, you can look at it more, but it isn't that critical that we do that now. We really want to see what happens over a longer period of time. The cyan, magenta, and green trails. Greens is hidden inside this bar because it cleared. It got stopped out right away. But the magenta went up to there. That's the trailing stop line. The cyan tracked along to here and then got stopped out there. Both positive results. And the first position didn't go anywhere, but that was fine. We still made $130 on the trade. So what we're going to do here is accelerate this up and see what else happens in the course of our 4-hour time frame here that we want to cover with our robot. So back to a fast acceleration. We've got 1 trade. Now we're in another trade. It's calling for a short. That's a nice trade. You can see all 3 trails. This green line is the trail for the first position. Here's the entry point right here. The trail got pulled up behind, and then it came back and made basically 0 money. The second position's trail is this magenta line, tracking along, hit the B stop, got pulled down, got stopped out here. And the third position, the cyan line, tracking along. When the price moved down here, pulled the trail with it, bumped up to its next trigger to tighten it up, and it got stopped out there. A nice trade. Okay, so let's accelerate. That's 2 trades. We're still only around 1:30 in the morning, so we may have to charge through some of these without stopping to look. There's another one, a really nice short. Just going to pause it to talk about the indicators real fast. See the MACDs? They're all trending down, down, down. If I turn on the MACD tool strip, I can change which plot line is being shown there. So there's plot line number 1, plot line number 2, plot line number 3, plot line number 4, and as you would expect, the one with the least variation, plot line number 5 that goes right across through the middle of the screen, nicely, barely moving at all. But right in this section right here where the trade happened, they're all not only trending down, but trending down with real momentum. That's why I love the MACD. It really gives you the momentum added in to the convergence. So there, and the MultiMACD that we use that relies on the convergence of multiple MACDs really gives you a powerful tool. We love it. It's a great, great indicator. Okay, let's accelerate out of here. That's our 3rd trade. I'm honestly a little surprised at the result here. Usually when I just slap together a robot, I don't get quite such good results. Now we all know that replay is what replay is. There's a losing trade. So here's a losing trade right here. Lost a few ticks on it. Entered here with a short. Fell off to here. And then right here, see this little bar here? That indicates that we tried to get into a trade, but the limit expired. So let's charge on here. So when you have replay data, you know that it's only good for testing functionality, not for actual trading. So there's a loser right there. Got into that a little bit too late. I'll pause so we can look at it really fast. Should have been getting in a little bit earlier over here. but the MACDs weren't calling for a trade all the way over to here. Maybe our MACD is a little bit too conservative. We really should have been in that trade earlier. Okay, let's go on. We're not quite to 4 a.m. There's a really big movement. Right at the end of our time frame here, just before 4 o'clock. Let's look at it and see what we really should have done. We made some money on it, but actually both of our initial positions got stopped out in the first bar, so that really wasn't that great. The third position managed to eke out a profit all the way up to here. We really wanted to be in the trade a little bit earlier though. And the reason we weren't is that the FibPro macro was still calling short right here. It wasn't until we got the price back up to this average line for our FibPro macro that we were able to identify this as a market moving long. Because the longer your look-back period is with the macro or the micro, with the FibPro, the more resistant it is to change. The more conservative it is. So what we're going to do, just for fun, is go back into our robot and modify our look-back period of our macro, make it a little bit less restrictive, and also pull in our MACD settings so they're not quite so conservative either. Let's see if we can get into some of these trades a little bit earlier. So bring back up the Strategy Management Console, edit the strategy I'm working on here, go to the MACD, and I'll pop up my spreadsheet real fast and look and see what I want. I'm an hour and 47 minutes back. I don't really want to be that far back. Let's try the 2.1 multiplier. Yeah, that puts me about an hour back. So I'm going to change it to 2.1. Oops, there's 2.1. And I'm going to take my FibPro macro. And I'm not going to look back quite as far. I'm going to go back just 1,500 seconds. Those are two small changes. We're going to leave it at that. If you change too much, you have no idea what actually affected the change that you see. And then again, I go back to my control panel. I go back to just after midnight on 5/22. Okay, you recognize everything again. The big gold bar, the gold box is the macro. The small one is the micro. The green lines are the MACD. Then turn on the robot. And let's let it rip forward to 4 a.m. and see if we do a little better. Set it at 200 times. We'll go through our replay data here. There's a trade. That was a minus 130. Got into that trade and out too fast. There's a limit expired there. I want to pause really fast and look at this trade and show you what the reversal line did to us, or did for us. So we got into this trade here, and almost immediately the price shot back in the wrong direction. This gold line, which is the midline of the FibPro macro, is identified as our reversal line. If you ever are on one side of that and fall back to the other side, it dumps you out of the trade. That's a market monitoring check. It means the market is moving rapidly in the wrong direction, and you just want to get out of there. So that's what that did for us there. Okay, let's get going again, and let's accelerate it again. Okay, there's a short. Call it short. Was not bad. Moving in the right direction. All in all, pretty nice trade. Got us back into the positive for the day. So we're at 130 and we're only two trades, one winner and one loser. There's another one going long. That one pegged on reversal. Here's one going very long. See how the momentum indicators are just crying out for short trades, and then they start to reverse. Here they're saying, okay, the momentum is shifting, going back long. Calls for long trade, basically gets stopped out at 0. We're at 2 o'clock in the morning now. There was a trade we tried to get into, but the limit order expired. Coming up 1 o'clock in the morning now. Momentum swimming back long. There's a long trade. Good money, really good money on that one. Got in right early enough. Now there's a beautiful trade. That short trade was wonderful. So these settings, I'll get back to building your own robot here in a minute. These settings did great things for us. We went from making $120 in this first 4 hours of trading to $890. All that means, though, is that we're starting to narrow it down. Not that we have the final solution. If you acquire the developer's version, please take your time in developing robots. I'll give you all the help in the world. I'll do everything I can to make it useful for you. We have lots of indicators. These are only 2 of them. Our volume indicator, you can learn about more if you go back and watch the technical presentation that's available through the developer's version link on the Indiegogo website. It talks all about how amazing the volume indicator is. If this were a robot I was going to keep, I would now add the volume indicator to it. And the volume indicator would let me control when you enter a trade by further limiting by various checks on the volume. So this is a robot. Robots are made to take the emotion out of trading, and that's what I use this for. I love gold because it moves a lot, and I love reactive indicators, and that's what I'm using here on this example. We also have quite a few indicators that are way more long-term, way slower to react, very good with the Treasury bonds and the Euro that have a lot higher volume but lower movement. We have a great product here. Again, we're only offering it through the Indiegogo campaign. My partners are very reluctant to let this out of house, but my department built this. Very proud of it. It's a great piece of software, and if you do acquire it, I'll help you build your robots. Give you all the support that I can. In any case, that's basically it. We've created a robot. I'm happy with it so far. Obviously, it needs a lot more work, a lot more refining of the settings. My name is Mark Fowler. I'm the Director of Development at AutoDayTrade.com. This is my email address. I'll leave it up for a few minutes if you want to write it down. Please go to our Indiegogo campaign and just look and see what we have to offer there if you haven't seen it yet. And we appreciate very much your attendance. Thanks again. We look forward to hearing from you again.